Hello, today is Monday, July 20th, 2026. I got back from my trip to Tianjin, China yesterday. I was there from July 16th to 19th. It was 3 days and 3 nights and 4 days. It was a rather short trip, but it was okay for the city because the city is relatively small with a population of 14 million people. But from the tourist perspective, the city was small because many things were reachable by train or on foot, and not many things really attract your eyes or draw your awe and surprise. But it was smooth, quiet, and breezy. There were some winds blowing from the ocean, from the eastern coast, because it's the port city. But most of the people reside inland, like 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers away from the coast. So it was a good trip, and I stopped reading English every day for my tour. But since I got back from my trip, I will resume reading English material. This article is from FinanceYahoo.com, and let's see what Trump is trying to do. Right, he always likes tariffs or harassing the neighboring countries and all the countries around the world, and he is bombing the shit out of Iran, killing many people. Of course, U.S. soldiers, so far 3 died and several wounded, and but Iran, maybe several thousand people died, including several hundred school children, when the U.S. bombed the school that was previously used by the military headquarters. So there was a terrible and the repeat of tit and tat or TikTok response from both sides, which seems to be escalating. I like the U.S., but I also don't like the way it handles the world affair. So let's find out what is going on with the Trump administration. Fortune. So this article appeared on Fortune magazine, the American newspaper, American magazine. After the Supreme Court killed his first tariffs, right, it was against the law, Trump turns to new legal workaround to impose 25% tariffs on Brazil and possibly others. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs were supposed to raise billions of dollars in government revenue while reviving American manufacturing. Instead, after a Supreme Court ruling forced the Trump administration to reimburse much of the money it collected, it's now looking for workarounds to impose tariffs anyway. Workarounds. So workarounds, right? Here. Workarounds. One such workaround will take effect later this month when the Trump administration imposes 25% tariffs on many imports from Brazil. The fresh tariffs announced this week arrived after the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative conducted a year-long investigation under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 that concluded Brazil had engaged in unfair trade practices. Really, the move revives a battle the Trump administration has waged specifically against Brazil since last year, when the White House imposed tariffs totaling 50% on certain Brazilian imports after Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro was accused of leading a conspiracy to overturn his election laws in 2022. Bolsonaro was later sentenced to 27 years in prison. That's terrible, right? 27 years in prison, overturn. This is a simple word, but it's a very powerful word. Overturn his election laws in 22. To overturn his election laws in 22. To overturn his election laws in 2022. Still, the administration's actions against Brazil may also be the beginning of an alternate plan to implement tariffs in line with the president's wishes, despite the questionable effectiveness of such duties so far, experts say. So we call that quagmire, right? Quagmire. Tariff disappointment. Since the Supreme Court ruled in February that Trump could not use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or EPA, to impose tariffs, importers have been issued about $71 billion in refunds, according to the U.S. Treasury's monthly statement, with $166 billion in refunds set to be paid out in total, and domestic manufacturing having increased a measly 1.1% over the year as of June, year over year as of June. Trump's tariffs are turning out to be more of a drag than a boon for government revenues, said James Knightley, ING's chief international economist. This is interesting expression. Trump's tariffs are turning out to be more of a drag than a boon for government revenues. Trump's tariff policies are turning out to be more of a drag than a boon for the U.S. economy, for government revenues. Trump's tariffs are turning out to be more of a drag than a boon for government revenues. Very good. Very powerful expression, man. The hope was tariffs were going to be a big revenue raiser, and right now it appears that actually tariffs are going to be potentially a loser through the second half of this year, Knightley told Fortune. It's these very lackluster results thus far that may motivate the administration to push even harder to implement its tariffs, Knightley added. It's like to add an insult to an injury, right? These very lackluster results. 오셨어요? 네. Just after the Supreme Court struck down many of Trump's tariffs in February, he implemented a temporary 10% global import surcharge, citing Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 though this measure lasts only 150 days and expires later this month. Okay, so he's very tenacious, right? He's going after jugular of the world economy, but it turns out to be more of a drag than a boon for government revenue. Struck down many of Trump's tariffs. The administration is now taking a slower but potentially more lasting approach, investigating countries' trade practices under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, like it did with Brazil. The method, although it requires a sometimes slow-moving investigation and gives businesses an opportunity to comment, is effective. Trump used this approach several times during his first stint in office, including to impose 25% tariffs on roughly $250 billion worth of Chinese imports. Although challenged, Trump's tariffs on China using this method were not struck down by the courts. Wow. Once an investigation is completed, let me stop here and right. Once an investigation is completed, the tariff rates can also be adjusted without restarting the entire process. Melissa Ehrman of the Director of Advocacy for the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones told Fortune, if you set a tariff at say 15% and it's deemed that it needs to be modified, then changing it to 30% isn't the same involved process, she said. The administration has proposed tariffs on dozens of trading partners, including the European Union, following investigations into their enforcement of bans on goods made with forced labor. This could mean Brazil is only the first of many economies to be affected by fresh tariffs. What does it mean? Business effects. That doesn't mean the new duties will be immune from lawsuits. Ehrman said lawsuits could look to argue the administration failed to prove a foreign practice harmed the U.S. economy. They could also question whether tariffs would remedy the alleged harm. Regardless, importers are tired of the uncertainty. After the rapid tariff implementations under EPA imposed last year, companies had to scramble to comply, she said. Just like last time, businesses could once again pay duties for months or years only to again seek refunds if courts strike them down. We may have the same situation where tariffs are implemented. Tariffs are collected for a period of time, and by the time the court decision happens, if it does go the way EPA went, we may have to see another refund process again, Ehrman said. That would be freaking stupid. Longer investigations may give businesses more time to prepare, but many businesses will still be left wondering what countries or products Trump will target next, throwing a wrench into their long-term planning, right? Another good cliche. Throwing a wrench into their long-term planning. Like throwing a wrench in a wheel, right? Spoked wheel. Throwing a wrench into the bicycle wheel. That would really crash the bike, and bikers' health would be subject to the severe fall or scratches on his arms and so on. So throwing a wrench in the long-term planning is really stupid and dangerous for the economy and the large corporations. I don't like that. Uncertainty is just not a good thing in any kind of business planning, Ehrman said. More tariffs could also raise prices and make it harder for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Knightley added, which would affect businesses overall. Still, Trump will likely trudge ahead with his tariff plan, even as he has repeatedly insisted the Fed lower rates. Right? Insisted the Fed should lower rates. I feel like Trump resembles the Turkish Prime Minister or President Erdogan, right? He raised the interest rates, right? I forgot. So that he lowered interest rates for the banks for the loans, so that people can use more money when the money is really just like paper, right? The economy in Turkey is tanking, which is very sad. I liked Turkey very much when I traveled there in 2013. I wish to visit Turkey several times more if the economy is doing okay now. But I heard that Starbucks coffee is like $10. The air balloon in Cappadocia is more like $300 or like I don't know, $800 per ride, which is absurd. And food and everything is really high priced. I don't want to go to Turkey right now. So it's same with America. American economy is tanking. The inflation rate is higher. People are earning less money and spending less. Still, Trump will likely trudge ahead with his tariff plan, even as he repeatedly insisted the Fed lower rates, because trade policy could soon become one of the only tools left in his arsenal. Some polls have predicted Democrats may win the House and split the Senate following the midterms. If Republicans lose control of Congress and Trump struggles to pass laws that further his agenda, he may rely more on his executive power, said Knightley. If you can't do tax and spending, you are going to be more limited to areas where the president has executive powers, he said. And trade, of course, is one of those executive powers. I don't know, this one is plural and that one is singular, right? Singular, this is plural. Where the president has executive powers. This story was originally featured on Fortune.com. So from this article, we encountered many interesting expressions like trudge ahead, executive power, dependent on his own executive power. Trump has more executive powers with trade issues, overturned his laws, struck down his tariff plans. It's throwing a wrench into a long-term planning, tariffs. What else? So the upside of using app to practice English is that you can record and mark down whatever you want for later review. Executive powers, throwing a wrench into their long-term planning, struck down many of Trump's tariffs, right? Trump's tariffs are turning out to be more of a drag than a boon for government revenues. Workarounds. Trump's tariffs are turning out to be more of a drag than a boon for government revenues. Struck down many of Trump's tariffs, throwing a wrench into their long-term planning. Executive power. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening. Have a great time on Monday. Bye-bye.